Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I'm your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo. With me, as always, in this epic quest of awesomeness and looking rather dehydrated at the moment is the cat. Cat, did you just come from the desert?
No, it's way too humid. It's so humid. Oh my god, guys, it's really hot. It's summertime now. It's really, really hot, and sometimes I work in a building that doesn't have air conditioning, and if it's 100% humidity and 94 degrees outside, it is 100% humidity and 94 degrees inside, as it was today. And I'm just really tired. I'll be okay.
Okay, all right. Well, okay. I can see we're gonna probably have to refill the water cooler before this episode's over.
If I pass out, just roll me over.
All right. Okay. Well, glad to see that you made it here and that you haven't died of heat stroke.
It's been real close on some days. Like I tend to go to that building on like a Friday so that I can spend Saturday and Sunday like getting over being heat sick. Guys, don't work in warehouses unless they have air conditioning. It's a scam.
And I'm pretty sure an OSHA violation, but that gets into legal quagmires that I am not qualified to comment upon. So, but anyway, we got a fun show for you guys tonight. Tonight we're discussing dead franchise resurrections. We're talking about the properties that lay dormant for many years before they're suddenly resurrected in other forms. Maybe a television show that got continued in a comic book, or a novel series that gets continued in an audio show. So, yeah, that's going to be a real interesting show. And this would be the part of the show where we jump straight into Ask a Geek. But first, there is some business that we want to announce. Next episode, we are going to be discussing comfort media. What is, what are some shows or some properties that, you like to keep going back to? Maybe a book that you like to keep rereading, or a show that you like to binge every year or so. Stuff that we just really like to go to, just because it's the media equivalent of comfort food, and we want to do this as a listener participation show. So we want you guys to send us in the email to drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com. What's some comfort media for you? What is something that you keep going back to? What's a game that you like to keep replaying? What's a book you like to keep rereading? A show you like to keep rewatching? And so we want to hear from you guys. So yeah, send in your responses to drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com, and you just might get your response read on that show during that discussion. And so with that, we're going to jump now into Ask a Geek. Also, you can send your questions to drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com. It's really It's really an all-purpose email. We get the questions, listener responses. I get my junk mail there. So yeah, go ahead and send your questions in. And our first question here, let's see. This one comes from Erica. And it is to Cat. And her question is, what is a bit of anime paraphernalia that you would like to collect or get into, but you've never really been able to find the time or the cash for?
Oh god. Because everything that I'm really into, I already get into. I guess more figurines, like the really expensive figurines. You know which ones I'm talking about.
I'm pretty sure that's all of them now.
Yeah, because I've spent like 20, 30, 40 bucks on figurines, but there's always like the Okami ones that are like they like start at $100 or more that I could just never bring myself to do. So I've always gone for like cheaper or smaller figurines, or something I really, really hella wanted. And I've just never been able to bring myself to spend a lot of money on a really nice figurine. And there's always been a couple out there that I've thought, God, I really, really want that one. One of my favorite series ever is Natsume's Book of Friends. It's like one of the only slice of life shows that I would lay down and die for. It's so good. And like every year they release a new extremely beautiful figurine, and I can never afford any of them. I want them really badly. But there's almost no anime paraphernalia that I haven't indulged in that I really want. You know what it is? Ita bags. Ita bags is the only thing that I've thought, wow, I want one of those. And they're not like an anime thing, but they're really popular at anime conventions. If you don't know what an Ita bag is, it's like a cute little backpack that has like a clear panel on it. And then on the inside of the clear panel is where you put like pins and charms and keychains and anything that you want to display. And they're very, very cute. They, like all the ones I've seen, have this very like very Lolita look to them. I don't know if they originated in Lolita culture or not. But because I always see them at anime conventions, I usually see them in context with Lolita stuff. But I have a couple of friends who have Ita bags, and they just display all of their really cute like anime pins and their anime merch. And I've got tons and tons of anime pins and charms and all kinds of stuff that I just have no good way of displaying and carrying around with me. And I kept thinking, oh man, I'm gonna get one of those Ita bags, and then I just haven't. And I think that's probably what I'd end up getting. There was a Kickstarter a while back for like a D20 kind of Ita bag, and I super regret not getting it, despite the fact that I in no way, shape, or form need another little backpack. But like a D20, and you can get like all of your like your damn D&D pins that I know I'm gonna end up collecting. God, nerd. Anyway, Ita bags. That's what I'll say. Ita bags and more expensive figurines.
Okay, all right. And we got another question for you, and this one comes from Ryan. And his question is, what is the most unusual set of dice you've ever seen?
Oh, that's easy. There's a luxury dice website. I cannot think of it off the top of my head. But they sell when they had it in stock, mammoth tusk teeth.
I think you should talked about those before.
It's so insane. But that same website also does like alligator bone and like all kinds of stuff that you're like, how does that even work? But yeah, lots and lots of bone. I did see a set of dice that was on Etsy that was being billed as being made of human bone that had been found in like the house of a serial killer. And I'm like, I don't think that would be auctioned off on Etsy, but you know, okay. You don't want to be accused of purchasing evidence to a crime. Yeah, that's definitely what it would feel like. Or like, what police department is selling this to raise funds? Oh, so strange. I mean, that's like the weirdest stuff, is just something that was once alive. Like, I have a set that I had custom made that have shark teeth in them, and they were shark teeth. They're like 15 million year old fossilized shark teeth that I picked up on beaches in Maryland over the course of 10 years. So I have these really beautiful, beautiful dice that have teeth in them, but like, it's not like new teeth or anything, you know. It's actually really, really cool, but it's still pretty weird. One of my friends just got into dice making, and she is currently making like extra large size dice that have these are not weird, these are cool. I'm getting off topic, but still, these are cool. They're extra large dice that have tiny little resin weapons in them, and tiny, tiny little potion bottles in them. And I just think that is the cutest goddamn thing I've heard in a long time. It's just, tiny potion bottles. Because, like, you know, when you roll your healing, when you take a potion, you can roll it on that die. It's so adorable.
Is this the thing you shared on Facebook earlier today? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
I'm seeing right here.
Yes, I did. They're so cute.
Oh, those are really cool. Okay, all right. And he's got a second question here, and that's: have you ever heard of the webcomic Darths and Droids? It's a Dungeons and Dragons comic centered around Star Wars. Basically, it's a group of players playing the Star Wars saga as a Dungeons and Dragons game.
Interesting, because I know like there's obviously Star Wars games out there, but I didn't know there was like a comic that somebody was making that was kind of in that vein. No, and I've never heard of that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I've actually read it. It's actually really funny.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
It sounds cute.
And and the thing is, it's like it very quickly it completely diverges from the actual plot of the Star Wars films. So the way it's presented, it's basically screen caps of the Star Wars movies with the word balloon superimposed over the shots. So basically, it's supposed to be like the players are the characters. But it very quickly goes completely off the rails from the plot of the film. So it basically, like for example, in the prequel trilogy, Palpatine turns out to be like the good guy who's like an uber environmentalist, and that's why he built the Death Star, was to be like it's so I can't begin to describe it, but it's fucking hysterical, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, send me a link for that. I'll check that out. That sounds fun.
Okay, yeah, I'll send it to you after the show. Okay, and let's see. I'm starting to feel a little left out here. So what is a question?
Only for me. Only questions for me.
Okay, let's see here now. Okay, here's a question here from Bob, and he asked me, what is a item that what is my dream item I'd like to have in my collection? Okay, well, previously I would have said the original Shantae for the Game Boy Color, which is probably the rarest Game Boy Color game out there. The cartridge alone runs for several $100s, so that would have been my answer, except I've actually already got a deal made for a copy of it through a mutual friend of mine and Mike's. He's selling it to me on an installment plan, and I'm making my last payment this Friday. Yes. Yeah, there's a You Might Be a Geek joke for you. If you ever had to pay for a video game on an installment plan, you might be a geek.
Christ, Gonzo, Christ.
Yeah. So I would say probably the next Holy Grail item that I would like to have would be oh god, because there's so many. I think probably I would have to say a CDI, a Sega CD, excuse me, CDI. Yeah, no, I don't want a CDI. CDI shit. A Sega CD copy of Snatcher, which was a game by Hideo Kojima, the guy who created Metal Gear. It was released on the Sega CD, and it was basically a video game version of Blade Runner. Supposed to be a really great story, and I would love to have a copy and be able to play it on the original hardware. But again, it's one of those games that runs for several $100s. The last time I saw the lowest price I've ever seen on a complete and box copy of Snatcher was $1,200. It's a ridiculously expensive game, and even that's on the low end for that. So I would say Snatcher is probably my next Jesus take the wheel item. Where if I see it, I just have to walk away, or else I'll spend money that I really can't afford. Okay. And then, let's see, he's got a secondary question here. What is the hardest thing you've discovered about game collecting? The most difficult thing that I've discovered about game collecting, it actually doesn't really have anything to do with, coming up with the money or deciding what you want to collect. But I've discovered it's a very easy trap to fall into, to look at other people's collections and then get discouraged or envious or think that, your collection will never be that great. And it's a trap that I still keep finding myself falling into. I'll look at, because one of the things I love doing on YouTube is watching game room tours, seeing how other people have set up their game collections and their game rooms. And I've seen some really, really creative stuff. One of my favorites, of course, I mentioned on the show, Metal Jesus Rocks. He's done a couple of game room tours. He just did one for his new house about a month or so ago. And there's also a channel called Nintendo Collecting run by a guy named Lithium. And he also coincidentally moved and just set up his new game room. But he's got his thing is all Nintendo. So he's got a whole wall of just Legend of Zelda games and merch. And he's got just this ring of amiibo running around his ceiling. But the coolest thing that he did was he printed out these adhesive wall stickers or something that he set up on the ceiling to make it look like his ceiling was bricks and mystery and question mark boxes from Super Mario Brothers. And it's just such an awesome game room. It's got this awesome Pokeball coffee table. He's got a full-size Super Mario Kart rideable go-kart in there, and it's just such an awesome game room. Complete run of Nintendo Power. He's got one of those, and it's I look at that and I'm like, that is so awesome. But then immediately I start getting oh god, my collection will never be that great. So, but it's like, and it's real easy to get discouraged looking at other people's collections, thinking, I'll never be that level. I'll never, have that awesome a collection. So I would say that the hardest lesson to learn in game collecting, it's one that I'm still trying to teach myself, is to not think that your collection is lesser than other people's collections because you're not doing the same things that they are. I acknowledge that my collection is one of the smaller ones out there. I've only got a little over 900 games, but still, I mean, I've got to sit down and look at that and be like, damn, 900 games. And, I've got it all out on display and it all looks really cool. My friends come over, they're like, you get a really nice setup here. And so it's really easy to get discouraged looking at other people's collections. So I would say the hardest thing for me to learn, and it's wisdom that I pass on, is don't let yourself get discouraged just because your collection is not someone else's collection. Your collection is an expression of who you are and what you're into. So, be proud of your collection, no matter what its size or how it's displayed. I mean, unless you've got dog shit all over your NES cartridges, then maybe you ought to, be a little bit ashamed of that and clean that shit up. But your collection is an expression of you and who you are. So, be proud of what you've got in your collection and what you've accomplished with it. And don't be discouraged just because someone else is doing something different.
Well said. Bravo.
Yeah. And that also applies to any other kind of geek. Maybe you got like an anime collection or a comic book collection. Don't be discouraged just because someone else is doing something different.
Although I've got to say, for dice collection, don't own 4 sets of dice and then say you have a problem to a dice collection group. Because I see this sometimes. People are like, "Oh my god, I'm such a dice goblin because I ordered 4 sets of dice." No. When you have to get a bigger bag, that's how you know you're a dice goblin.
Yeah, you especially you need meetings like Dysonon or something.
I just figure, okay, so my DM is so much worse than me. Because I've never bought the pound bag dice. When I get there, that's how I know I've got I curate my collection. But yeah.
How many of those do you even use?
I have a really so if it rolls bad, I'll just go pick another dice. So depending on whether or not we're in combat during a game, I have used all of my dice though, for real. Although some of them are my brother's and I should probably give them back.
Okay, and that's all the Ask the Geek questions that we have for this week. Thank you as always for sending them in. As always, you can send them to us through the email at drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com, and also send in your responses for our Comfort Media episode next time. So in 2 weeks, Comfort Media, send it. Tell us what is some media that you like to keep going back to. Once again, that email is drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com. And so with that, we're going to jump right into the meat and potatoes of this discussion. And one of the saddest moments of any fan's life is when their favorite show comes to an end, or their favorite video game comes to an end, and there's nothing more really coming down the pipe. So as a result, we tend to get very excited when we discover that a franchise that we thought has been gone and buried for many years suddenly comes back in another form, because it's another chance for us to revisit these worlds and these characters. And so we thought that it might be interesting to talk about some franchise resurrections that have occurred in the last several years, as nostalgia is, quite frankly, the biggest moneymaker right now. So, and talk about some that worked and maybe a few that didn't quite work out so well. And Kat, this is actually your idea for this discussion. So why don't you get started on this? What was your impetus for this discussion?
So we've talked to death about reboots and all of that stuff, and I thought with Avatar, The Last Airbender, hitting up on Netflix recently, and there's a bunch of people who are just finding it for the first time or rewatching it for the first time in a long time, that one of the really great things about Avatar and the Aang and his group was that it didn't end with just the 4 seasons. There was a comic that followed it, several comics that followed it, and we got to see more of the gang, and it's great. It's really, really fun and exciting. These comic books have been around for many, many years now, but it's not something that your average fan, your run-of-the-mill somebody who's just watching it on TV would probably know existed, especially when they first started releasing, maybe nowadays. But I just think it was really interesting that here was something that was super, super popular, that is kind of universally beloved. And even after it ended, we still got to see more of it. And we got to follow these characters. And it got me thinking about what else is out there. What other continuations of things have we seen that aren't, unnecessary sequels or reboots many years later, but what are just straight continuations that exist for things that we really like. And so, of course, like Avatar was the first one I was thinking of, which I don't know if you've read, but it's quite good.
I've read a couple. The only one that I remember with any real clarity was, I think it was the first one that was published. I think it was The Promise, that picked up right after the end of the series. Yeah. And then there was another one that I started, but I never finished. It was the one where Zuko and Azula went off in search of their mother. Yes. And it was like, there was like a whole, it finally answered the question of like what actually happened to their mother and why she was exiled from the Fire Nation. Is that right?
Yeah. And isn't that great? Because that was one of the big leftover cliffhanger questions that never got answered. Like, it is literally a cliffhanger in the TV show that never fully gets addressed. There is like a scene of Zuko going to his dad in prison and going, "Where is my mother?" And for that, like, that big thing, that huge, like, because that is such a character motivator for him to not know what happened to his mom, to think she was dead, or maybe think she was alive somewhere. For that story arc to be continued, and for us to get to see more of Azula, who at that point had been defeated, but was also probably pretty insane, and still extremely dangerous, and to have that continuation and get to like see Zuko, that's not spoilers, guys, but to get to like see what actually happened to Zuko's mom was such a big deal. And as a fan, you could have never found out at the end of the series and still felt fine about it, because then it's just left up to your imagination. But to have that hole filled in was super, super rewarding. And I really appreciated that the comics took the time to address that, okay, yeah, the good guys won and the bad guys lost, but it's way more complicated than that. And that the political aftermath of an imperialist nation taking over a bunch of countries and then they lose a war, there's a lot of stuff that has to go on after that. And it was really interesting that the Avatar comics, went and dug deep into those things.
Okay, and you say these stories tend to maintain sort of a pretty high quality, because that's something that I've found is kind of hit or miss with these franchise continuations. Is a lot of them, the writers kind of really miss what really worked in the show, and so the comic winds up not really being up to the same level as the original work. So is that not the case here?
Yeah, I think they hold up pretty well, all things considered. I want to say the writers for Avatar were directly involved in the comics, but I could be wrong there. Somebody feel free to call me out if I'm wrong. I don't collect the comics. I buy them for my roommate for Christmas, and then I read them. So I don't know whose name is on the front off the top of my head. But I want to say that it was, because these are a direct continuation, that I want to say the same people were involved, especially because then those same writers went on to make Korra as a another direct continuation. I think it was all the same people involved, but I think they hold up really well in terms of characterizations, and the world building certainly was like the most important thing you could latch onto there. So I thought that they were quite good. I didn't think maybe they were, I don't remember them being quite as funny as the TV show, but, like, I haven't read them in a long time. So I could be wrong. But otherwise, yeah, I feel like they hold up.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see. In the gaming sphere, usually if a story needs continuing, it usually gets another game. But there have been some cases where a game story has been continued in non-video game media. The one that really leaps out to me the most is Final Fantasy VII and its sequel film, Advent Children, which I remember there being a huge buzz and excitement for that when it was announced in the gaming community, because Final Fantasy VII was like it's very difficult for me to really explain and just how much of an impact Final Fantasy VII had on the gaming community and how much of a phenomena it was, especially in the RPG crowd. So, and of course, the tradition of Final Fantasy is, no game is a sequel to the one previous. Every game is its own unique story. Nothing gets carried over except maybe, some themes, or maybe like, a character will make a cameo here and there, but otherwise each game is its own standalone story. So when it was announced that Final Fantasy VII was getting not just a sequel film, but also a sequel game in Dirge of Cerberus, there's this whole multimedia blitz that Square was trying to pull off with the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. It had like Advent Children, the movie. It had Dirge of Cerberus on the PS2. It had Crisis Core on the PSP. There was a couple of mobile games which didn't come to the US. And I just remember there just being this huge excitement for the fact that we were actually going back to this world and this story and these characters. And but things were kind of hit or miss with it. So like I remember not really being very impressed with Advent Children, the movie, and it kind of harkens back to what I asked earlier about the writers not really understanding what made the story work. Because so something that happened, basically it has to do with how the characters were characterized. Yeah, Department of Redundancy Department. So in the intervening period between the release of Final Fantasy VII and the release of Advent Children, there'd been this kind of Flanderization that had come across the main character of Cloud, where the popular image of him was this kind of mopey, emo, My Chemical Romance fan. Just kind of like, oh God, I can't be forgiven for my sins. Oh, doom and gloom. When, in fact, if you go back and you play the original game, or even you go back and you play the remake, which thankfully has that original characterization, Cloud wasn't mopey or emo at all. And I kind of feel like that this new characterization that appeared in Advent Children and in other media was actually kind of a bleed over from Final Fantasy VIII, where that the main character of that game was a whiny emo prick for much of his story. So I kind of felt like that the writers had kind of lost touch of what made the characters tick, and it really felt more like just a fan service thing. Here are these characters again, and we're going to bring back Sephiroth for some weird reason, and here's a heavy metal remix of One Winged Angel, which is admittedly pretty kick-ass. But it just, I don't know, it felt like the story didn't really hold up with Advent Children. On the other side of that, you had Crisis Core, which was actually a sort of a prequel to the main story following Zack and his time in Soldier. And I actually did really enjoy that, aside from, the Nibelheim chapter, which opened up some really big plot holes, but that's neither here nor there. And again, it had to deal with the fact that the characters, they work the same way that they did in the original story. I felt like the characterization was spot on. So that's really sort of the thing that really will turn me off on a franchise continuation, when elements of the original story and the original characterization are kind of basically thrown out the window and just written as kind of, what the popular image of those characters is. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Especially with what you said with Advent Children, it feels like fan service. That's what it was. Like, I know nothing about Final Fantasy, but I watched that movie many, many times with friends, and just I ended up buying it. But it is fan service. That's all it is. It's very, very pretty fan service.
And I mean, and let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. it just wasn't my cup of tea. But like I said, if it just felt like they're kind of showing off, like, oh, here's these characters again, and then we'll just build this really kind of weak story around it. And it just, like I said, it felt like just kind of almost throwing the fandom a bone, if that makes any sense. Just kind of like, oh, here's this thing, go have fun, not really crafting something that was a genuine continuation, or genuine expansion of this story.
It felt like something an anime would do rather than a video game would do.
Yeah, and that's really sense. Yeah, and that's really what it felt like to me. Was an OVA.
Yeah, it was just like, here's this OVA that really doesn't have much to do with anything, but the budget is really high, so we're just gonna put everything in it. That's exactly what it feels like. Yeah,
and you'll love it because it's Final Fantasy VII. So, but the whole compilation project really kind of fell through. And I'm really gratified by again, getting a little bit off topic. I'm really gratified that the remake is actually, it feels like the people who are making the remake really understand what made the original story tick and what made the original characters work, and they're sticking really close to that while still being able to do their own thing. Now, a franchise continuation that did work for me, and I bring it up because a lot of people forget that this actually was the resurrection of a dead franchise, and that's Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, which kicked off the original Star Wars expanded universe. Because a lot of people forget that before Heir to the Empire came out, and I think it was 1992, there wasn't really a whole lot going on with Star Wars. You had a couple of cartoon shows in the 80s, and then you had maybe like one novel and the Marvel Comics, and that was it. But then here comes this trilogy of novels in the early 90s that not only return us to these characters, but also tell a brand new story that expands the universe, hence the term expanded universe, and tells a really kick-ass story, not just with the original characters, but also introduces a slew of brand new characters that work really well on their own in conjunction with the original characters. I still hold up that Grand Admiral Thrawn is the greatest Star Wars villain ever written. So, which is why I'm really happy that he was brought into the new canon in Clone Wars, although I still have to see that episode, but yeah, I was so happy. So, and the thing that I really loved about the Thrawn trilogy, and why it's my favorite piece of Star Wars expanded universe material ever, is, like I said, it managed to expand the setting, show us what happens with these characters years after Return of the Jedi, but the characters aren't derailed, and what's happened to them in the interim makes logical sense. We get to see, Han and Leia have gotten married, they're expecting kids. Luke is kind of a little unsure of what to do now that he's the last of the Jedi, and kind of exploring his place in the Force. And there wasn't a whole lot of, going back and, oh, here's this thing from the films that you remember, like, there wasn't a whole, we didn't go back to Tatooine again for the 100th time. So I'm sorry, that's just a personal bugbear of mine. I hate the fact that they keep going back to Tatooine. We didn't we didn't spend the whole time, calling back to, and we killed Darth Vader here, and this is what we did here at this place, and it actually moved the story forward. I think the only location that was revisited from the films was at one point Luke went back to Dagobah, pursuing a Force vision, but that was like one chapter, and then that was it. We got to see new alien species introduced to the universe, and they were actually fleshed out, and not these clans of one note stereotypes. And I absolutely love these novels, and I love what they did with the universe. And I get that the old EU gets some flack because there were some really bad stuff written. Crystal Star, oh my god, so awful. But the Thrawn trilogy to me is the gold standard of how you write expanded universe material in the Star Wars universe. Sorry, I went a little fanboy for a bit there.
I mean, we expected it.
Yeah. So, but now, what's a franchise continuation that you've seen that didn't work? Because I know you've seen a couple.
So this is a very limited capacity thing. So I would be happy to have people give me their opinions on this. But the Buffy comics. Now, like, the later seasons of Buffy obviously got kind of weird, and the last season of Buffy definitely got weird. But from what I understand of the comics, I haven't read very much, but I have read about what happens in, and I cannot for the life of me figure out what drugs were done in order to make some of these character decisions. Or, like,
such as?
Who thought some of this was interesting. The one that weirds me out the most is that Giles dies and comes back as a kid. And I don't know why that is a thing somebody wanted to put into a comic. I don't get it, guys. I don't get it. Maybe it makes a lot of sense when you read it. But to me, that is such a weird thing to have happen on the outside. God, I think, I believe Dawn is a giant at some point. Like, there's just a giant Dawn walking around. And does Buffy discover that she's in love with Xander? That's a thing I've read? That, like, Xander was the one for her all along, and I'm like, what is happening in these comics? And I'm so afraid to read any more than I already have, just because of some of the things I've read. And I'm just like, I mean, like, Buffy was already a series that occasionally got away from itself, but the comics sound like they really get away from the show. And I don't know that that's a world I necessarily want to explore. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that Buffy was already a very long show. That I would argue sort of declined in its last season, certainly. And it had already, gone through all of the really good content that world building could produce while still centering around the same characters. And I'm just wondering if they just were like, hey, here's all the weird shit we could never get past the, not the censors, but the studio overlords who would go, that's too weird, we can't put that on television, especially at that time period. So I'm just wondering if they just started pulling ideas out of their asses on the Buffy comics, or if they were just like, here's all these ideas that have been tossed around for a long time, and now we're gonna do them. I don't know what happened there. Somebody tell me. I didn't research it enough before this show. I need to know what drugs happened for the Buffy comics. But then, like, conversely, just to stay on the Whedon comics line, like, the Firefly comics were very good. They were so very good. And to me, I'm wondering if that's because the show was so short and canceled so early, and because of that, there was a lot of mysteries that never get solved. And now,
well, not just that, there were a lot of blanks in the world building left to be filled.
Yeah.
Whereas imagine with Buffy, by the end of the show's run, the show's universe had pretty much been set.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many times where the world is going to end if Buffy doesn't fix it, that you can keep, like, hitting, like, rewind, repeat, play, like, it, and the way that the show ended was so big. It was such a big way to end the show. Like, all of the Slayers. And, there's, like, a lot of world building, like, outside of Sunnydale that could take place, and I'm just not sure that, how much of that really happened to justify all the weird shit that happens. It gets weird. You know how, like, Angel got really weird?
I'm afraid I don't.
Oh, never mind. Anyway, Angel gets really weird at points, and I really feel like they were trying stuff that just didn't work, and kind of why I ended up hating the Angel series. I feel like that, like the Buffy comics got angeled. But in any case, like, the Firefly comics, they continue with, like, oh, you remember that preacher who very clearly has a dark, shady past? Let's explore the dark, shady past. What happens to Zoe after Wash is killed? Let's talk about that. And it's hitting on these really, really interesting things for a series that fans really decry its cancellation on. So, we're all very, 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 very sad. And we've wanted a continuation ever since. And if we have to get in the comics, then we'll fucking take it. And for the comics to actually be good and interesting and give us what we want. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things is that when you're continuing in a different media format than what you originated in, you gotta want it, And it's like how My Little Pony has comics,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually met one of the ladies who works on some of the comics, and lovely girl. But that's something that, your average kid isn't probably going to go out and look for unless that kid is already into comics, or they happen to stumble across it and their parent buys it for them. But you gotta really want the continuation, I think, to justify its existence, because typically if something's ended, it was ended for a reason, and a lot of TV shows get prematurely canceled, and the cult following basically demands a continuation, and then you get it in some other format. Or there's just a market for it already. Like all the bajillion Star Wars and Star Trek novels that exist. Bajillion being the scientific term here. Clearly there's a market for it. So whatever you put out should be good, because you're trying to please those same fans. And you might even get more fans because you've changed the format into something else. And you might get fans who enjoy that format more than its original format. So, it should be good. And it's not always good, but you should want it to be good. Especially for the lesser known shit. Like, the Firefly comics are not really a big deal on the comics scene. But to Firefly fans, that's everything. That's everything they want. And, if you're going to give that to them, I think that there's sort of an obligation to put out a really high-quality product. And, of course, we don't always get that because, different people are on that team now. For somebody to write a book and then somebody else to make a comic out of it takes different skills. Somebody who makes a video game is not the same person who's going to write a book. And that's where I think a lot of it kind of, I don't want to say falls apart, but there is a gap there of understanding, of information, of skill.
Things get lost in translation from one medium to the next.
Yeah, basically. So, getting an inconsistent tone or whatever, some of it's to be expected, just because you're getting literally a different kind of product. But I just think that if you're going to do a continuation of something, that you should really, there should be a demand for it so that you have an expectation to meet. Does that make sense? I don't know what I'm saying at this point.
It makes sense. But there's also kind of, you kind of touched on something, another point here, where a lot of times, because fans are very kind of clingy in a sense, we tend to cling to the things that we love. We also tend to put them up on a pedestal. So we're a very hard crowd to please.
Oh yes.
So when we see something coming back that we really loved in another form, we're kind of just immediately on the defensive.
Absolutely true.
Or I think maybe it's not going to work. A continuation that surprised me as to how well it worked was the Netflix movie for Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling. So for those who don't know, for those of you too young to remember, Rocko's Modern Life was a Nickelodeon cartoon from the 90s. And if you go back and you watch it, it's very clear that it was a 90s cartoon. It's very much set in the culture of that time. And there are a lot of things in that series that really date it. For example, those old credit card things where instead of sliding it into a machine, you had to put it in this thing, and they in this thing that would take a rubbing of it, and it sounded like racking a shotgun every time you used it.
Oh my god.
Yeah, who remembers those?
I do. Anybody who worked retail for at a certain time period remembers those.
Yeah, or the home shopping channels, that used to be all over the place, and the scams that those were. So, there's a lot of that would get kind of lost in translation if you tried to continue that in the 2010s. So when it was announced that Netflix was going to be putting out an hour-long kind of mini movie for Rocko's Modern Life, the first thing I thought was like, God, how that has to be just for the nostalgia crowd. There's almost no way I can see it. They're going to be able to translate that style of humor and that, from that time period into today's. But I was proven completely wrong, because like literally the first 5 minutes of the show are just these characters going like, guys, we're not in the 90s anymore, and just exploring all the absurdities of modern culture. Like, for example, the Starbucks on every street corner. There's coffee shops being literally across the street from one another, or how there's a new iPhone that comes out every 5 minutes. And it was just this lovely lampooning of what would these characters from 20 years ago, how would they react to the modern world and its new absurdities? And it was just such a joy to revisit these characters again, and also had this kind of really neat little message that came with it, which is that things change and they evolve over time. And while that can be scary, it can also bring a lot of good things that you'd miss out on if things just stayed the same forever. Because the whole plot of the movie is Rocko is completely overwhelmed by how much things have changed in the last 20 years since he's been stuck in space. It's a long story. How he got to space is a long story, which we won't go into here. But he and his friends come back, and he's just completely overwhelmed by how much things has changed, and he just wants this one little bastion of nostalgia, his favorite TV show, to come back, so that it can just be like his little safe space where he can just kind of escape from the craziness of the modern world. So he seeks out the creator of the show, who he discovers that the creator of the show has actually changed themselves. So the creator of the show was a character named Ralph Bighead. And when he finds Ralph has actually transitioned. She's I think Regina now. It's been a while since I've seen it, and he's kind of like, look, everything's changed. I need this one. I just need one things to go back to how they are. And he learns kind of at the end of the movie that things change and they evolve. And while that doesn't make the old things meaningless or worthless, if you just cling only to those old things, you miss out on a lot of new things that could also be really good. And it was just a really neat movie, and I absolutely love that they were able to go back to this world and these characters, and not just bring that old 90s style humor forward, but also rework it to make it fit in the modern world. So it really is Rocko's modern life movie, if that makes any real sense. Yes, I made a pun. So it's interesting it's really interesting sometimes to see how. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you went silent on me, so I was gonna talk. So you continue your thought.
Oh no, you go ahead. I was rambling.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because, like you said, we are very clingy. We are very hard to please. If you couldn't tell by every fandom ever, but we can get pretty toxic at times as fans, and a lot of that is just like you said, we put something up on the pedestal. We see these rose-colored glasses, and we don't want anything to change. We just want this perfect thing, and we want it again. And we've discovered through time and through sequels and reboots that we're never gonna get that again. And all we can do is capture the magic of the thing we like and try to replicate it in some new way. But it's the magic we're trying to replicate and not the thing. So we have a lot of hit and miss in all of these reboots and sequels that we've been, watching over the last however many years that's been most of the market in movies and stuff. But we're so hard to please. And you're never going to please everybody. And that's another big thing, is that you're never going to please anybody completely, I think, but definitely never going to please everybody. And if a continuation of a TV show to a comic or a game to a book, if it can capture that magic, that's really, really important, because it means that the person who made it understands what we understand, even if we don't understand why we understand what we understand. Understand?
I think I understand.
I sure hope so, because I have no idea what I just said. Man.
So, of course, then you can also run into the trap of someone being so much of a fan of something that they wind up forgetting what made it works, and then you just wind up producing something that reads like bad fan fiction.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So, but anyway, so that's about all the time that we have for this week. So yeah, sound off in the comments. What is a franchise that you saw get resurrected? Did it work? Did it not work? And what about it? What about it caused it to succeed or fail in your eyes? And of course, don't forget, our next episode, we're going to be discussing comfort media. What is stuff that we like to just keep going back to? That's going to be a listener participation show. So go ahead and send in your comfort media and why you keep going back to it. And we'll probably read your responses on the show. But anyway, that's all the time that we have for Nerd to the Third Power this week. Thank you as always for tuning in. We will see you guys next time. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm the cat.
All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Taka, play us out.